The clash of steel against steel reverberates through the mountain pass as Roland leads the charge against the advancing Saracen army. The air is thick with the screams of men and horses, the metallic tang of blood, and the acrid smell of fear. Yet amidst this chaos, Roland stands as a beacon of courage and strength, Durendal flashing in his hand like lightning made solid. With each swing of his legendary blade, Roland fells an enemy warrior. Durendal, it seems, has taken on a life of its own, guiding Roland's hand with an almost supernatural precision. The Saracens fall before him like wheat before a scythe, their armor offering no more protection against Durendal's edge than parchment wood against a bonfire. For Charlemagne, for France, Roland's voice booms across the battlefield, rallying his men. The Frankish knights respond with a roar of their own, drawing strength from their leader's indomitable spirit. They fight with renewed vigor, each man striving to match Roland's heroic deeds. As he cuts a swath through the enemy ranks, Roland's mind is clear, focused. He is acutely aware of every movement on the battlefield, every shift in the tide of battle. He sees where the Frankish line is weakening and moves to shore it up. He identifies the strongest of the enemy warriors and challenges them directly, knowing that defeating them will demoralize their followers. But even as he fights with seemingly inexhaustible energy, Roland is not blind to the reality of their situation. The Saracen army seems endless, a sea of men and horses that stretches as far as the eye can see. For every enemy he cuts down, two more seem to take his place. The Frankish rearguard, brave and skilled as they are hopelessly outnumbered. Yet Roland does not despair. He knows that their task is not to achieve victory, but to delay the enemy long enough for Charlemagne and the main army to retreat safely. Every moment they can hold this pass is a moment gained for their emperor and their countrymen. As he parries a blow and counters with a thrust that drops another Saracen warrior, Roland catches sight of Oliver fighting nearby. His oldest friend and most trusted lieutenant is a whirlwind of destruction in his own right, his sword singing a deadly song as he holds off multiple attackers. Their eyes meet for a brief moment across the chaos of the battlefield. No words are needed. They communicate volumes in that single glance. Both men know the direness of their situation, but both are committed to seeing their duty through to the bitter end. Roland turns his attention back to the battle at hand, Durendal cleaving through enemy ranks with unstoppable force. He loses himself in the rhythm of combat, his world narrowing to the space around him, to the reach of his blade. In this moment, he is more than just a man. He is the embodiment of Frankish might, a legend coming to life before the eyes of friend and foe alike. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, painting the battlefield in harsh light and deep shadows, Roland fights on. His armor is dented and blood-spattered, his muscles burn with exertion, but his spirit remains unbroken. He is Roland, greatest of Charlemagne's paladins, and he will not falter while breath remains in his body. As the battle rages on, the true power of Durendal begins to manifest in ways that even Roland, familiar as he is with the blade's capabilities, finds awe-inspiring. The legendary sword seems to hum with energy, its edge never dulling despite the countless blows it has delivered. Roland recalls the tales of Durendal's origins, of how it was forged by the renowned weaponsmith Roland and imbued with holy relics. The tooth of Saint Peter, the blood of Saint Basil, the hair of Saint Denis, and a piece of the raiment of the Blessed Virgin Mary. All these are said to be contained within the sword's golden hilt. As Roland wields the blade, he can almost feel the power of these sacred artifacts flowing through him, granting him strength beyond mortal limits. With Durendal in his hand, Roland becomes more than just a skilled warrior. He is a force of nature, unstoppable and awe-inspiring. The Saracens who face him directly often falter, their courage deserting them in the face of this seemingly invincible foe. Those brave or foolish enough to challenge him directly find their weapons turning aside at the last moment. or their armor failing against Durendal's supernaturally keen edge. In one particularly fierce exchange, Roland finds himself surrounded by a group of Saracen elite warriors. They attack from all sides, their scimitars flashing in the sunlight. Yet Roland stands firm, Durendal moving with impossible speed to parry every strike. Then, in a move that seems to defy the very laws of nature, Roland spins in a complete circle, Durendal extended. The blade passes through steel, flesh, and bone, as if they were no more substantial than air. In the blink of an eye, all of Roland's attackers fall, their bodies splitting apart, before they even realize they've been struck. The sight of this superhuman display sends shockwaves through the Saracen ranks. Whispers begin to spread among the enemy soldiers, tales of the invincible Frankish warrior and his magical sword. Some begin to lose heart, fear overcoming their desire for victory. Yet even as Durendal demonstrates its incredible power, Roland is careful not to become overconfident. He knows that the sword, mighty as it is still just a tool. It is his skill, his courage, and his unwavering devotion to his cause that truly make him formidable. As he continues to fight, Roland offers silent prayers of thanks for Durendal's strength. He vows to be worthy of the holy blade, to use its power in service of God and Charlemagne. With each swing, each parry, each deadly thrust, Roland reaffirms his commitment to his duty and his faith. But powerful as Durendal is, it cannot change the fundamental reality of the battle. The Frankish rearguard is still vastly outnumbered, and even Roland, with his legendary blade, cannot be everywhere at once. As he cuts down foes with seemingly effortless grace, he's acutely aware of his comrades falling around him, of the Frankish line slowly but inexorably being pushed back. Still, Roland fights on. Durendal becomes a blur of motion in his hands, its blade seeming to glow with an inner light as it deals death to the enemies of Christendom. And as long as he can still lift the sacred sword, Roland knows that hope remains. For in Durendal, he holds not just a weapon, but a symbol of all that he fights for: his faith, his emperor, and the future of his people. Despite the incredible power of Durendal and Roland's unmatched skill, the sheer number of Saracen warriors begins to tell. The Frankish rearguard, valiant as they are, find themselves slowly but steadily being pushed back. Roland, in the thick of the fighting, is acutely aware of the gradual shift in the battle's momentum. From his vantage point, at the heart of the conflict, Roland can see the toll the battle is taking on his men. Brave knights, men he has fought alongside for years, fall one by one under the relentless Saracen assault. Each loss is a knife in Roland's heart, but he forces himself to focus on the living, on those still fighting, still needing his leadership. Oliver, fighting nearby, catches Roland's eye. Without a word, Oliver gestures towards the pass behind them, his meaning clear. They are losing ground, being forced further and further back into the narrow defile. If they're not careful, they risk being completely surrounded. Roland nods grimly, acknowledging the danger. He knows they cannot hold their current position much longer. With a series of hand signals, he begins to organize a fighting retreat. It's a delicate maneuver, requiring the utmost discipline and coordination. They must pull back without breaking formation, all while under constant attack from the pressing Saracen forces. As he orchestrates this dangerous dance, Roland becomes a whirlwind of action. Durendal flashes in his hand as he alternates between issuing commands and cutting down any Saracen warrior brave enough to come within reach. His voice rises above the din of battle, encouraging his men, directing their movements, bolstering their resolve. "Stand fast, men of France," he cries, his voice carrying clearly despite the chaos. "Every step we yield is bought with Saracen blood. Make them pay dearly for each inch." The Frankish knights respond to their leader's call with grim determination. They fight with the desperation of men who know they're likely facing their last battle, each one determined to make his final moments count. The mountain pass becomes a charnel house, the ground slick with blood and littered with the bodies of the fallen from both sides. Yet despite their valor, the Franks continue to be pushed back. The Saracen army seems endless, each fallen warrior immediately replaced by two more. Roland can see the fatigue setting in among his men, their movements becoming slower, their reactions dulled by exhaustion. In contrast, Roland himself seems tireless, Durendal moving with undiminished speed and power. He becomes the linchpin of the Frankish defense, shoring up weak points in the line, rallying flagging spirits, turning back the fiercest Saracen assaults through sheer force of will and martial skill. But even Roland, great as he is, cannot be everywhere at once. He watches with a sinking heart as gaps begin to appear in the Frankish formation, as small groups of knights become isolated and overwhelmed. The Saracens press these advantages ruthlessly, sensing victory within their grasp. As the sun begins to dip towards the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Roland finds himself facing a terrible reality. They have fought valiantly, held off an overwhelming force for hours, but they cannot hold out much longer. The rear guard is on the verge of collapse. In this moment of crisis, Roland's mind races, considering options, searching for some strategy that might yet snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. But as he looks out over the sea of Saracen warriors still pressing forward, he knows in his heart that there will be no 11th hour reprieve. Their task now is not to win, but to sell their lives as dearly as possible, to delay the Saracen advance for as long as they can. Roland tightens his grip on Durendal, his jaw set in grim determination. If this is to be their final stand, then he will make it one that the Saracens will never forget. As the battle reaches its fever pitch, Roland finds himself at the center of a maelstrom of violence. The Saracens, recognizing him as the linchpin of the Frankish defense, focus their efforts on bringing him down. Wave after wave of enemy warriors throw themselves at Roland, hoping to overwhelm him through sheer numbers. But Roland stands firm, Durendal weaving a web of steel around him that seems impenetrable. The legendary blade moves with impossible speed, parrying blows from multiple directions simultaneously, then striking back with lethal precision. Roland's years of training, his unmatched skill, and the holy power of Durendal combine to make him seem almost superhuman. Yet even as he fights with undiminished vigor, Roland can feel the tide of battle turning against them. The Frankish line, already stretched thin, is beginning to fracture under the relentless Saracen assault. Small groups of knights become isolated, fighting desperate last stands against overwhelming odds. Roland's heart aches as he sees his comrades fall one by one. These are men he has fought alongside for years, brothers in arms, whose courage and loyalty have never wavered. Each loss is a personal blow, but Roland forces himself to channel his grief into determination. He will make the Saracens pay dearly for each Frankish life they take. As he battles on, Roland becomes aware of a growing pain in his temples. The exertion of combat, the strain of continuous fighting, is taking its toll. He can feel his brain swelling, pressing against his skull. Yet he ignores the pain, pushing his body beyond its limits through sheer force of will. In a brief respite between waves of attackers, Roland catches sight of Oliver. His oldest friend is surrounded, fighting off multiple Saracen warriors with grim determination. Without hesitation, Roland plunges into the fray, Durendal cutting a path through the enemy ranks to reach Oliver's side. Back to back, the two friends fight in perfect synchronization, their movements complementing each other as if they were two parts of a single organism. For a moment, it feels like old times, the two of them against the world, unbeatable as long as they stand together. But the moment is fleeting. As they fight off the immediate threat, Roland and Oliver exchange a look that speaks volumes. Both men know that this is likely their last battle, that they are fighting not for victory, but for how they will be remembered. Roland, Oliver says during a brief lull, his voice hoarse from shouting battle cries. "Perhaps it's time to sound the horn. Call Charlemagne back. We've done our duty, held them off as long as we could." Roland feels a flash of temptation. The Oliphant hangs at his side, unused. One blast could bring Charlemagne and the main army rushing back to their aid. It might mean salvation for the remaining Frankish knights. But as quickly as the thought comes, Roland dismisses it. His pride, his sense of duty, will not allow it. They are the rear guard, tasked with buying time for the army's retreat. To call for aid now would be to fail in that duty, to risk the safety of Charlemagne and the entire Frankish force. "No, my friend," Roland replies, his voice firm despite his fatigue. "We fight on. We die here if we must, but we will not fail in our task. Let them remember us as we were, unyielding to the last." Oliver nods, a mix of resignation and pride in his eyes. Without another word, the two friends throw themselves back into the fray, Durendal and Oliver's sword flashing in the fading sunlight, as they deal death to any Saracen foolish enough to come within reach. As the battle rages on, Roland feels a strange sense of clarity descend upon him. He knows now that this is his final fight, that he will not leave this mountain pass alive. But far from filling him with fear, this knowledge brings a sense of peace. He has lived as a warrior, and he will die as one, faithful to his God, his emperor, and his duty to the very end. With this resolve burning in his heart, Roland fights on. Durendal becomes an extension of his will, each swing a defiance, hurled in the face of death itself. And as the sun sinks lower in the sky, painting the battlefield in hues of red and gold, Roland prepares to write the final glorious chapter of his legend. As the relentless Saracen assault continues, Roland finds himself fighting with a ferocity that surprises even him. Durendal moves in his hand as if it has a will of its own, cutting down foes with deadly precision. The legendary blade seems to shine with an inner light, its edge never dulling despite the countless blows it has delivered. Yet for all his skill and the power of Durendal, Roland cannot stem the tide of battle alone. The Frankish rearguard, vastly outnumbered from the start, has been whittled down to a mere fraction of its original strength. Those who remain fight on with grim determination, each man knowing that he faces his final hours. Roland's world narrows to the space around him, to the reach of Durendal's blade. He loses track of time, lost in the rhythm of combat. Parry, thrust, swing. Each movement flows into the next, his body operating on instinct, honed by years of training and battle. But even Roland has his limits. The continuous fighting has taken its toll. His arms burn with fatigue, his breathing comes in ragged gasps. The pain in his temples, which he had been ignoring, has grown to a throbbing agony. He can feel, but even Roland has his limits. The continuous fighting has taken its toll. His arms burn with fatigue, his breathing comes in ragged gasps. The pain in his temples, which he had been ignoring, has grown to a throbbing agony. He can feel blood trickling down the side of his face, whether from an enemy blow or the strain of battle, he cannot tell. Yet Roland fights on. Each Saracen warrior he fells is another moment gained for Charlemagne and the retreating Frankish army. He becomes a fixed point on the battlefield, a beacon of defiance, around which the remaining Frankish knights rally. As the sun begins to set, painting the sky in hues of red and gold, Roland becomes aware of a change in the battle's tempo. The Saracen attacks, relentless until now, begin to slacken. At first, Roland thinks it might be a trick, a ploy to lure the Franks into lowering their guard. But as he surveys the battlefield, he realizes the truth: the Saracens are as exhausted as the Franks. For a brief moment, a surreal calm settles over the mountain pass. Roland uses this respite to assess their situation. What he sees fills him with a mix of pride and sorrow. The ground is littered with the bodies of fallen warriors, Saracen and Frank alike. Of his original force, only a handful remain standing. But they have exacted a terrible toll on the enemy. For every Frank that has fallen, 10 Saracens lie dead. Roland's gaze falls on Oliver, his oldest friend and most trusted lieutenant. Oliver is barely standing, his armor dented and blood-stained, but his sword is still raised in defiance. Their eyes meet across the battlefield, and a wordless understanding passes between them. They have done their duty. They have bought Charlemagne the time he needed. Whatever comes next, they will face it together. As if sensing this moment of resolution, the Saracens renew their attack with fresh vigor. Roland raises Durandal once more, ready to meet this final assault. As he does, he utters a prayer, not for victory or survival, but for the strength to see this last task through to the end. The final phase of the battle is a blur of desperate combat. Roland fights with the strength of 10 men, Durandal flashing in the fading sunlight, as it reaps a deadly harvest among the Saracen ranks. But even Roland's superhuman efforts cannot change the inevitable outcome. One by one, Roland sees his companions fall. Brave knights, men he has fought alongside for years, give their lives in this last desperate stand. Each loss is a knife in Roland's heart, but he channels his grief into a cold fury, making the Saracens pay dearly for each Frankish life they take. Oliver is the last to fall. Roland watches in anguish as his oldest friend, surrounded by enemies, fights to his last breath. With a cry of rage and sorrow, Roland cuts his way through the Saracen lines to reach Oliver's side. But he's too late. As Roland kneels beside his fallen comrade, Oliver manages a final smile before his eyes close for the last time. Now Roland stands alone, the last survivor of the Frankish rearguard. The Saracens hesitate, wary of this warrior who has wrought such devastation in their ranks. Roland uses this moment to catch his breath, to steel himself for what he knows will be his final stand. As he does, Roland becomes aware of a sound rising above the din of battle. It takes him a moment to recognize it, the sound of Frankish horns, distant but growing closer. Charlemagne, it seems, has heard the sounds of battle and is returning with the main army. For a brief moment, Roland considers sounding his own horn, the oliphant that hangs unused at his side. One blast could alert Charlemagne to their exact position, could bring reinforcements rushing to his aid. But Roland dismisses the thought almost as soon as it forms. His pride, his sense of duty, will not allow it. He is the rearguard, and he will perform his task to the very end. Instead, Roland raises Durandal high, its blade catching the last rays of the setting sun. For Charlemagne, he cries, his voice carrying across the battlefield. For France. With these words, Roland throws himself into a final suicidal charge. Durandal becomes a blur of motion, cutting down Saracens with every swing. Roland fights with the desperation of a man who knows he faces his final moments, each blow fueled by a lifetime of training, duty, and unyielding courage. As Roland fights his last battle, Durandal seems to take on a life of its own. The legendary sword glows with an inner light, its edge never dulling despite the countless foes it has felled. Each swing of the blade seems to pass through armor and flesh as if they were no more substantial than air. The very air around the blade shimmers, as if the laws of nature themselves bend in the presence of this holy weapon. Roland becomes acutely aware of a strange sensation coursing through his body. It's as if he can feel the presence of the holy relics contained within Durandal's hilt, the tooth of Saint Peter, the blood of Saint Basil, the hair of Saint Denis, and a piece of the raiment of the Blessed Virgin Mary. He feels their power flowing through him, granting him strength beyond mortal limits. His fatigue seems to melt away, replaced by a surge of divine energy. With this newfound strength, Roland's last stand becomes the stuff of legend. Saracen warriors fall before him like wheat before a scythe, their bodies piling up around him in a grim testament to his skill and Durandal's power. Those who face him directly often falter, their courage deserting them in the face of this seemingly invincible foe. Whispers spread through the Saracen ranks of the Frankish demon and his unstoppable sword. As he fights, Roland recalls the day he received Durandal from Charlemagne's hands. He remembers the weight of responsibility that came with the blade, the sacred duty to use it in defense of Christendom. Now, in his final hours, Roland feels that he has lived up to that duty. Every swing of Durandal is a reaffirmation of his oath, every fallen foe a testament to his unwavering faith. But even as Durandal demonstrates its incredible power, Roland is careful not to become overconfident. He knows that the sword, mighty as it is still just a tool. It is his skill, his courage, and his unwavering devotion to his cause that truly make him formidable. He silently thanks God for the strength granted to him through Durandal, vowing to use every last ounce of it in service of his duty. As the battle rages on, Roland becomes aware of a change in the very fabric of reality around him. Time seems to slow, each moment stretching into eternity. He can see every movement of his enemies with perfect clarity, can anticipate their attacks before they even begin. It's as if Durandal is guiding his actions, the combined will of the saints, whose relics it contains working through him. Yet, even as he marvels at this divine intervention, Roland knows that it cannot last forever. He can feel his mortal body straining under the pressure of channeling such power. Blood trickles from his nose and ears, a sign of the toll this supernatural exertion is taking on him. But Roland pushes on, determined to make every moment count, to sell his life as dearly as possible. As night begins to fall, casting long shadows across the battlefield, Roland's world narrows to the space around him, to the reach of Durandal's blade. He loses himself in the rhythm of combat, becoming one with the legendary sword. In this moment, he is more than just a man. He is the living embodiment of Frankish might and Christian faith, a legend coming to life before the eyes of friend and foe alike. As the battle reaches its final stages, Roland finds himself driven back towards a large boulder at the edge of the pass. The Saracen army, despite their losses, continues to press forward, a seemingly endless tide of men and steel. Roland's world has narrowed to the space around him, to the reach of Durandal's blade. He fights on instinct now, his body moving almost independently of his will, guided by years of training and the divine power flowing through Durandal. The pain in Roland's head has become almost unbearable, a constant, throbbing agony that threatens to overwhelm him. He can feel blood trickling from his ears and nose, a sign of the mortal damage the strain of battle and the channeling of Durandal's power has wrought on his body. Deep down, Roland knows that even if by some miracle he survives the Saracen onslaught, this injury will claim his life. Yet this knowledge does not diminish his resolve. If anything, it strengthens it, for Roland is determined that his last moments will be worthy of the legends that will surely be told of this day. As he continues to fight, Roland becomes aware of a change in the battle's tempo. The Saracen attacks, relentless until now, begin to slacken. At first, Roland thinks it might be a trick, a ploy to lure him into lowering his guard. But as he surveys the battlefield through eyes blurred with blood and sweat, he realizes the truth. The Saracens are as exhausted as he is. Their initial fervor has been replaced by a grim determination tinged with fear. They have paid a terrible price for every step they've gained, and the sight of Roland, still standing defiant despite the odds, has shaken their resolve. In this brief respite, Roland's thoughts turn to his fallen comrades. He sees Oliver's body not far from where he stands, his oldest friend's face peaceful in death. Nearby lies Archbishop Turpin, his weapon still clutched in his lifeless hands. All around him are the bodies of the men he led, each one a testament to Frankish valor. A wave of grief washes over Roland, but he channels it into a renewed determination. He will make their sacrifices count, will buy with his life the time needed for their deaths to have meaning. It's in this moment that Roland becomes acutely aware of Durandal's weight in his hands. The sword that has served him so faithfully through countless battles now feels like an extension of his very being. He can feel the power of the holy relics pulsing through the blade, in sync with his own heartbeat. A sense of divine purpose fills him, and with it comes a terrible clarity. He knows what he must do. With the last reserves of his strength, Roland turns and strikes the boulder behind him with all his might. The impact sends shockwaves up his arms, the force of it nearly causing him to drop Durandal. But the holy sword remains unscathed. Its blade is sharp and unblemished as the day it was forged. Again and again, Roland strikes the boulder, each blow fueled by desperation and an unshakable determination. The rock splits and crumbles under the onslaught, great chunks of stone falling away. But Durandal does not even chip. As he rains, blow after blow upon the unyielding stone, Roland's mind races. He thinks of all that Durandal represents: the faith of Christendom, the might of the Frankish Empire, the sacred duty of knighthood. He cannot bear the thought of this holy weapon falling into the hands of the Saracens. Better to destroy it, he thinks, than to let it be defiled by the touch of the infidel. But Durandal, it seems, has other ideas. No matter how hard Roland strikes, the blade remains perfect, unmarred by his desperate attempts to break it. It's as if the sword itself is resisting his efforts, determined to survive even if its wielder must fall. In this moment, Roland understands that Durandal's destiny extends beyond him, that the holy sword has a purpose that will outlive even his own legend. Realizing the futility of his efforts, Roland clutches Durandal to his chest, tears mingling with the blood on his face. He will die with the sword in his hands, denying it to his enemies until his last breath. As the Saracens, sensing his vulnerability, close in around him, Roland turns to face them one last time. He raises Durandal high, its blade catching the last rays of the setting sun. In this moment, man and sword are one, a single entity, standing defiant against the encroaching darkness. For Charlemagne, Roland cries, his voice carrying across the battlefield. For France, for Christendom. With these words, Roland prepares to meet his destiny. Durandal raised high, ready to carve his name into the annals of history with one final glorious stand. The world seems to slow down around Roland as he faces his final moments. The clamor of battle fades away, replaced by an almost supernatural quiet. In this strange, timeless moment, Roland's life flashes before his eyes, a tapestry of memories unfolding in vivid detail. He sees himself as a young boy in the court of Charlemagne, wide-eyed with wonder at the tales of great knights and their deeds. He relives his first lessons in swordsmanship, the weight of a practice blade in his small hands, the ache in his muscles as he drilled for hours under the watchful eye of grizzled veterans. He remembers the day he was knighted, kneeling before Charlemagne, his heart swelling with pride as he swore his oath of fealty. The cool touch of Durandal's hilt as it was placed in his hands for the first time, the sense of destiny that came with it. Roland relives his many battles, each one a test of his skill and courage. He sees again the fields of victory, hears the cheers of his fellow knights, feels the warm glow of Charlemagne's approval. But he also remembers the quieter moments, nights spent around campfires with his companions, shared laughter and camaraderie in the face of danger. He thinks of Oliver, his faithful friend now lying cold on the battlefield. Their friendship had been forged in the heat of battle, tempered by shared hardships and triumphs. A wave of grief washes over Roland as he realizes he will never again hear Oliver's steadying voice, never again fight side by side with his sworn brother. His thoughts turn to Aude, his betrothed, waiting for a return that will never come. He sees her face, beautiful and proud, imagines the life they might have had together in a world where duty didn't call him to this mountain pass. For a moment, Roland allows himself to indulge in this dream, a peaceful life, children growing old together. But even as the vision forms, he knows he would not have chosen differently. This here, was always his destiny. Roland thinks of Charlemagne, his uncle and liege lord. He remembers the weight of responsibility that came with being the emperor's champion, the pressure to always be worthy of the trust placed in him. In this final moment, Roland prays that his sacrifice has bought Charlemagne the time he needed, that the emperor and the Frankish army are safe. He hopes that when the tale of this day is told, Charlemagne will be proud of him, will know that Roland fulfilled his duty to the very end. As the Saracens close in for the kill, time seems to resume its normal flow. Roland becomes acutely aware of his body, the burning in his muscles, the pounding in his head, the taste of blood in his mouth. Yet, along with this awareness comes a surge of strength, a final reserve of energy called up from the very depths of his being. Roland knows that these are his last moments, and he is determined to make them count. With a final defiant cry, he raises Durandal high. The holy sword seems to glow with an inner light, as if recognizing that this is its moment of destiny as well, for God and Charlemagne. Roland shouts, his voice carrying across the battlefield, echoing off the mountain walls. It is both a battle cry and a prayer, a final affirmation of all that he has lived and fought for. Roland's last moments are a blur of desperate combat. Durandal flashes in the dying light, each swing felling a Saracen warrior. Roland fights with the strength of 10 men, his movements guided by a lifetime of training and the divine power that flows through Durandal. The Saracens press in, but they approach warily, fear evident in their eyes as they face this seemingly indestructible warrior. But even Roland's indomitable will cannot overcome the inevitable. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Roland feels a sharp pain in his chest. Looking down, he sees a Saracen spear protruding from his armor. Time seems to stop as Roland stares at the mortal wound, the reality of his impending death finally, irrevocably setting in. Yet even in this moment, Roland's courage does not waver. With his last reserves of strength, he raises Durandal one final time. The blade arcs through the air, cutting down the Saracen who dealt the fatal blow. It is Roland's final act of defiance, a last demonstration of the skill and valor that have made him a legend. As his life ebbs away, Roland sinks to his knees. With trembling hands, he holds Durandal to the sky, offering the holy sword back to God. His lips move in a final prayer, thanking God for the strength to fulfill his duty, asking forgiveness for his sins, commending his soul to heaven. As darkness closes in around him, Roland's last thoughts are of duty fulfilled, of honor maintained to the very end. And as his spirit leaves his body, it is said that a host of angels descended from heaven, come to bear the soul of this great warrior to its eternal rest. As Roland falls, a hush descends over the battlefield. Even the Saracens, witnessing the fall of this indomitable warrior, are momentarily stunned into silence. For a moment, it seems as if the very mountains hold their breath in honor of the fallen hero. The body of Roland lies where he fell, Durandal still clutched in his lifeless hands, the holy sword seeming to glow in the gathering darkness, as if reflecting the indomitable spirit of its fallen wielder. But the silence is short-lived. From the distance comes the sound of horns, a clarion call that echoes through the mountain pass. It is answered by the thunder of hoofbeats, growing louder with each passing moment. Charlemagne, alerted by the sounds of battle, is returning with the full might of the Frankish army. The Saracens, exhausted by their hard-won victory and fearful of facing fresh Frankish troops, begin to retreat. Their withdrawal quickly turns into a rout as panic spreads through their ranks. As night falls fully over the battlefield, Roland's body lies undisturbed, surrounded by a ring of fallen enemies, a grim testament to his last, heroic stand. The moonlight casts an ethereal glow over the scene, as if nature itself is paying homage to the fallen hero. In death, Roland's face is peaceful, his duty fulfilled, his honor intact. When Charlemagne and his forces arrive, they find a scene of unimaginable carnage. The mountain pass is littered with the bodies of the fallen, Saracen, and Frank alike. The air is thick, with the metallic scent of blood and the acrid smell of smoke from abandoned war fires. Frankish soldiers move through the battlefield, their faces grim as they search for survivors and identify the fallen. At the heart of this devastation lies Roland, immediately recognizable, even in death, by his distinctive armor and the legendary durandal still gripped in his hand. Charlemagne himself dismounts and approaches the body of his nephew, his face a mask of grief and pride. The emperor kneels beside Roland, gently closing the hero's eyes. Tears stream down Charlemagne's face as he takes in the evidence of Roland's courage and sacrifice. "Oh, Roland," Charlemagne murmurs, his voice thick with emotion, "bravest of my knights, most loyal of my vassals, your sacrifice will not be forgotten. Your name will live forever in the hearts of our people." As dawn breaks over the mountains, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Charlemagne orders a proper burial for Roland and his fallen comrades. The bodies of the Frankish knights are gathered and laid out with honor, each man's weapons placed beside him. Priests move among the dead, offering prayers for their souls. Roland's burial is a solemn affair, attended by Charlemagne and all the surviving Frankish nobles. His body is wrapped in a fine cloth of gold, durandal laid upon his chest. As the earth is heaped upon Roland's grave, Charlemagne speaks of his nephew's bravery, his unwavering loyalty, his embodiment of all the virtues of knighthood. There is not a dry eye among the hardened warriors as they bid farewell to their fallen champion. But even as they mourn, the legend of Roland is already taking shape. Bards who accompanied the army are composing songs of Roland's last stand,